The DCAU, one of, if not the very best superhero universe we've seen ever on screen. Honestly, to me, I always tell everyone that this is what I consider the perfect superhero universe on screen. I know the Marvel universe has done an amazing job, especially in live action. However, to me, even that amazing cinematic universe pales in comparison to the DCAU. Just by their storytelling ability and their ability to not only get all these characters absolutely adapted perfectly from the comics, but also introducing a concept that a lot of us as kids were not used to. We were very used to the concept of black and white, of good and evil, of the protagonist being good and the antagonist being bad. But this is a universe that introduced us to the gray area and introduced the concept that the heroes are not always in the right. And sometimes the protagonists and the antagonists actually operate in this gray area. And it leaves us, the audience, to decide who is right and wrong. And even then, there is not a consensus on who is right and who is wrong. There is still much debate as to who is right and who is wrong, whether that is the Justice League or whether that is Cadmus. And that's why, to me, the Cadmus arc is by far and away the best arc in the entire DCAU, because it did give us so many deep layered storylines that had so many callbacks and had so many more adult themes that centered around this gray area. And that's why today we're going to be talking Cadmus was justified in the DCAU. But before we get into anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Alright, Cadmus being justified. I know when I first say that, you might call me crazy, and you might list all the atrocities that Amanda Waller did help cause. However, this isn't a video saying Amanda Waller was justified. It isn't a video saying that everything Cadmus did was right. In fact, they actually did a lot of bad things. However, it is also important to note that a lot of the bad things they did was the direct impact to decisions made by Amanda Waller, because she did run Cadmus more so like a dictatorship. So I'll save that for another video as to how I personally feel about Amanda Waller and her decisions and the decisions made by her that did directly impact Cadmus. However, I think it does still stand, especially if you take out all the atrocities Amanda Waller was responsible for, that Cadmus itself as an entity was justified in their creation. And I feel like some of the first instances of this were in Superman the Animated Series. And we got to see when Darkseid invaded, the forces of Apocalypse were able to overwhelm the governments of the world relatively easily. And if not for Superman and Orion, we would have been totally and utterly screwed. So this was the first moment in which the people of Earth, and more so the governments of Earth, were starting to see that they were ill-equipped to deal with these great threats. Now, luckily for them, they did have superheroes like Superman to help with these threats. But what if those great heroes ended up becoming the threats themselves? And that's where I truly believe the creation of Cadmus is the most justified. Because not only did we see what happened when a rogue Superman does go against Earth, we saw 3 out of 7 of the founding Justice League members in some way, shape, or form have their powers and abilities used against the people of Earth. And the first instance of this, as I mentioned before, is in Superman the Animated Series, and happens when Darkseid is able to brainwash Superman and unleashes Superman against the world. He is able to absolutely cripple the governments of the world. All of our defenses were absolutely rendered useless against his great power, combined with the forces of Apocalypse. And now they were able to eventually defeat Superman, yes. However, it's also important to note how they were able to do this, because although they had weapons with kryptonite, they were not able to stop Superman until Supergirl did intervene. And only because she was there was Superman so distracted that he was able to be hit with one of these weapons with kryptonite in it. So if you would consider Superman being actually bad and maybe in a situation where he does himself choose to turn against Earth versus being brainwashed, well, then you lose your greatest chance at fighting against him. Because again, without Supergirl's intervention there, I don't know how easily they would have been able to hit Superman with those kryptonite weapons. So if you have Superman who is truly going against the world, it's easy to understand understand and reasonable to understand Supergirl would be on Superman's side, because again, she was only against him because he was being brainwashed. If he did truly turn, would she have the courage to turn against her cousin, her family, or would she turn against the people of Earth who she really doesn't know? It's more reasonable than not to assume that she would side with Superman. So this does justify at least a little bit the creation of Cadmus. And Professor Hamilton specifically saw firsthand that even after Superman was freed of his brainwashing, he still decided to use his strength and power to threaten Professor Hamilton, someone who was considered to be one of the closest, if not the closest person to Superman by that point in time. Unless you consider Lois Lane, who by that point was probably slightly closer to Superman. However, again, it is at least debatable. So he himself being part of Cadmus absolutely makes sense and is definitely justified in him doing so, because he got to see Superman not brainwashed, using his power for his own gain. And that was to save Supergirl, that was to save someone, but again, still not great to force someone's hand the way he did. Now, the other instance of this actually happens during the events of Justice League the Animated Series. However, it happens in another show that just takes place during that time, and that is the show Static Shock. And now again, I mentioned 3 of the 7 Justice Leaguers in some way, shape, or form having their powers used against the people of Earth. I chose that wording very carefully because this was not technically Green Lantern. It was Sinestro disguising himself as Green Lantern, attacking the people of Dakota and attacking the world. However, it still showed the people of Earth, and more importantly, the people who would become Cadmus, how dangerous the power of the Green Lantern could truly be if it was used against the people of Earth. So although this was not John Stewart, and it wasn't even a situation where he was brainwashed, we still got to see the ramifications of a Green Lantern going against the world, and the power that he held, how much damage he truly could do to society and to civilians. So this to me just furthers the justification for Cadmus being created. But that's not it, because in my opinion, the biggest instance of this is also in Justice League the Animated Series, and that's everything surrounding the Justice Lords. Obviously, we know in order to get that pardon for Lex Luthor, which led to the defeat of the Justice Lords, Superman had to divulge essentially everything that happened on that other world. A Superman very much so like our Superman decided to go to the White House, and in order to stop Lex Luthor, the president, from nuking the country, causing catastrophic devastation across the world, because it was going to essentially launch all of our nukes against everyone in the world, which would have been absolute Armageddon. So yes, definitely bad. However, in this moment, Superman had other options. He didn't have to kill Lex. He could have lasered off his hand. Boom. No hand, no button. And before anyone gets on here and says, oh, he had another hand, he could have just done that. Or, oh no, his hand would have fallen on the button. I highly doubt that if his hand got lasered off, it would have fallen on the button. 1, with enough pressure to press the button, and 2, at the proper angle to press the button, and 3, there's no shot after getting your hand lasered off that you would have the resolve to still get up and press a button and nuke everyone. If Lex Luthor is able to do that, hats off to him, more power to him. He has more willpower than anyone, I guess, because that would be a pain that is unimaginable. After he lasers off that hand, he could just speed blitz him. But speaking of speed blitzing him, he could have speed blitzed him and gotten there before Luthor was able to press that button, stopping him. By this point, Superman has a ton of control of his abilities. We've seen him through 3 seasons of Superman the Animated Series. And yes, I know this is a different universe. However, it is reasonable to assume that a lot of the events still happened in a similar fashion. Justice League Unlimited actually does tease us with that, and teases us with the fact that this isn't a parallel universe situation. It is more so linear timelines, and that the Justice Lords were just ahead in the timeline. And that's why we saw those events happen the way they did and happen before our world Justice League events did occur. So now Cadmus does know what happens with an out of control Superman. And not only that, but then after that, the Justice Lords did take over and created a situation that was similar to the regime, similar to them being overlords of the world, governing the world how they saw fit. We even saw Superman talking to the president in that world about election season and talking about how this fall they need to have an election. However, Superman in this moment says elections are too dangerous, so they just weren't going to have them, and the current president was going to stay simply because he was okay with the Justice Lords operating how they were. That is literally the definition of what a dictatorship looks like. However, they weren't just dictating one government of the world, they were dictating and governing the entire world, putting themselves above everyone else and acting as if they were beyond reproach and that they were truly judge, jury, and executioner. And that's a theme that is definitely followed in Justice League Unlimited after the events of seeing the Justice Lords. However, it doesn't end there because the Justice Lords actually ended up on the main DCAU Earth and they fought Doomsday. Did they stop him? Yes, they did. But guess how they did that? Superman decided to lobotomize Doomsday. Was he an absolute threat? Yes. Was he someone created by Cadmus at that point? Yes. Very, very bad. However, Superman still, in front of so many people, and even on TV, decided to laser through his skull. That just optically is never going to be something that the general audience and the general people that are seeing that are going to support, because they don't want to see their hero, their savior, as someone who would just cold-bloodedly kill someone. Again, they don't have all the facts as to what Doomsday truly is by that point, so it does make sense them being outraged by this. And even Lois is shocked in this moment and says to Superman that he lobotomized him. And then all of the League is there and they support the decision. They support things needing to change. And this furthers the justification for the creation of Cadmus, because not only are we seeing what the League's powers could do against the people of Earth, but even just the public perception of the Justice League is starting to shift. Now, they did eventually find out that was a different version of Superman, but it was still in the back of people's minds and something that people definitely were very weary of after this moment. And again, rightfully so. When you have the powers of Superman, you are going to be scrutinized for virtually everything you do because you have the power of a god. Now, that being said, that does not end there, because I did mention a third person who had their powers used against the people of Earth. However, in this situation, to me, it's even worse, because Hawkgirl's deception and betrayal goes a couple steps further. She wasn't brainwashed. She wasn't really manipulated. She was sent to Earth to find out about their weaknesses, to find out about their infrastructure. And yes, she did end up betraying the Justice League. However, it was the Justice League who indoctrinated her into their group. They entrusted her. So if they did not do that, would the people of Earth trust Hawkgirl as much as they end up trusting her? No, I don't think they would have. Would they have still considered her a hero? Yes, it's very likely. However, when the forces of Thanagar did arrive, I think it would have been a bigger debate than it ended up being because of the support of the Justice League and how virtually every member of the Justice League did support the Thanagarians helping the people of Earth. Aside from Batman, he was pretty skeptical right off the bat, which again, classic Batman, he's the GOAT. But that being said, this does give us even further justification for the creation of Cadmus, because we got to see when the Justice League were down and out, the Justice League could not save the people of Earth. And as a result of the Justice League's failings, not only to defeat this enemy, but the failings to do their proper homework on Hawkgirl and to ensure she was someone who could be trusted with the safety and security of the people of the world, because again, that is the Justice League's top priority. So ensuring that each and every member does share those sentiments and those values is something that to me is very important. So they definitely failed in that aspect. And the people of Earth were forced to see the negative results of that. They were under martial law. They were effectively under an even stricter dictatorship than the Justice Lords did enact, because there were Thanagarian troops patrolling the streets, patrolling the airs, putting out broadcasts telling people that they had to be inside by certain times, telling people that they had to turn over the escaped Justice Leaguers or they would be treated as prisoners. They kept people prisoner simply for knowing information. The people who were aboard the Thanagarian command ship were held there. Again, they were eventually released, but they were still held against their will. So, after the events of Superman, after the events of Justice League, this just fully capped off how dangerous the Justice League truly could be. Again, these were people who were going to destroy the planet, because mind you, the Thanagarian invasion was solely to create a hyperspace bypass, which would have not only destroyed civilization on Earth, the entire planet Earth would have ceased to exist. So, the threat of that alone could have justified the creation of Cadmus in at least some way, shape, or form. Now, if you compound that with all of the other events that I have mentioned, it's definitely reasonable to understand why Cadmus had to be a thing. However, I'm not done there. There is even more reasoning and justification for the creation of Cadmus, and that actually begins in Justice League Unlimited, the sequel to Justice League. One of these events, Hawkgirl is accepted back into the League, and when public perception combats this and has issues with this, people snap back at the public. Green Lantern and Superman say, no, she was never voted out. We wanted her to stay. So you're telling me after this person was solely responsible for all of us being put under martial law and nearly destroyed as a planet, you just decided to let her back into the League? She faced no consequences from any type of governmental body from the world? That's a huge issue and definitely further justifies why people are so weary of the Justice League. Because her being reintroduced and welcomed back into the League after all she did with virtually no consequences, that's a huge issue. Again, yes, I know she went and did some self-reflection and she no longer wears her headdress, but still, that's not actual consequences. That's not people of the world getting to decide her fate in some way. And I think they should have. I think they should have had to say whether she could have joined the League again. I think they should have had to say whether she was even welcome on the planet Earth anymore. Because if not for her, they would have never been in the situation they were in during the Thanagarian invasion. They would have never been at risk for the entire planet being destroyed. So does she even have a right to be here? That should have been a question that was posed. And again, just further justifies why Cadmus had to be created. And then last but certainly not least was the expansion of the Justice League. Now, this goes into two parts. And part of that was their space station getting wildly upgraded to the point where they had a laser that could fire with pinpoint accuracy from space on any location on the entire Earth, and that beam would create a trench that was literally miles deep. So being weary of that definitely makes sense. There's no reason they needed that. And their justification was if the Thanagarian invasion were to happen, then this laser would have helped. However, to me, that does not justify having this space weapon, especially when you consider someone ends up taking control of it and firing it on the world. So again, space-based weapons, you don't need that, especially when the public is already very, very nervous about the existence of the Justice League. However, they definitely make this worse by expanding their league by not 5, 10 people. No, it's like 10 to 15 times that original 7. I'm pretty sure the official count is like 57 or 59 league members that we actually see and actually get dialogue. Might be a couple more because there might be a few that just cameoed, like the character Obsidian. He doesn't get any lines, and I'm almost positive is only shown in one clip of a background scene where Batman is running through the hangar. However, it does go to show you how many league members they do truly have and how large this fighting force really is. And then another justification for Cadmus is Batman's viewpoints on this. Even Batman thinks that the Justice League is starting to get out of control. So much so that he brings in Green Arrow, someone to help keep them grounded. Because although Batman is there to have his contingency plans and have him be the one to keep them grounded, even he is starting to think that maybe he himself is becoming too much like the League, too reliant on the League, and too clouded in his judgment to be able to properly keep them in check. So he has to go outside of the League and bring someone else in to help look out for the little guy, help look out for the everyday person. And Green Arrow is someone who does that. And we do see throughout the series that he does definitely check the Justice League when they tend to go a little out of bounds. Now, that is virtually everything that does lead up to the creation of Cadmus. So if we're going to look at the things that justify Cadmus, we do also have to take a look at the negatives that Cadmus did. A lot of this was the direct impact and influence of Amanda Waller. But that being said, we do still have to take it into account to a certain degree. And some of those events were like the cloning and manipulation of the Ultimate. Now again, keep in mind, I did not say the creation of the Ultimate was bad, because to me, the creation of the Ultimate was actually a really great choice and a really great decision. And we even saw that they were interested in helping people. They were interested in using their powers to save people. Were they a little focused on fame and getting the acclaim from the public? Yes, but at their core, they did care about people and care about doing better for society. However, this is all pretty much undone when they find out that not only were they genetically engineered, but they also had their memories implanted and manipulated to the point where Cadmus was hiring actors to pretend to be people from the Ultimate's past, which definitely would cause some pretty traumatic mental states for all of them, which is why they ended up turning on people and ended up turning against the League. Granted, they did eventually stop before they did anything catastrophic, at least against people, because the Justice League was able to stop them before it got too out of hand and got to talk them down before they crossed any line. However, I think this was just all a result of the cloning, which was definitely Amanda Waller's fault. She literally forced Maxwell Lord to get the clones ready for them and then mass produce the clones, which she then later uses again. This is Amanda Waller, not Cadmus itself. So all in all, I think that was a pretty poor decision, but it was mainly by the person that was in charge of Cadmus versus Cadmus as a whole. Another thing, speaking of cloning, was the cloning of Supergirl. Now, this was mainly Professor Hamilton under the guidance of Amanda Waller, and she was just batshit crazy, to be totally honest with you. She seemed to love violence, she loved killing, and she got a thrill for it. She didn't really care about saving people. She didn't care about really anyone other than herself and Professor Hamilton, and then obviously killing Supergirl. So all in all, this was just a pretty bad idea from the conception. However, it was again mainly due to Amanda Waller wanting some type of clone of either Superman or Supergirl. I do put this as a slight knock against Cadmus because it was Professor Hamilton who was largely in part of this division of Cadmus, which did not go anywhere good. She didn't do anything positive in the entire series. She did some pretty negative things. So that's a big negative against Cadmus. Another thing is leaving Lex off his leash, which again, this isn't necessarily a Cadmus thing. This is an Amanda Waller thing. Cadmus only used the funding from Lex Luthor. However, outside of that, they really had no interaction with him. That's why I say this one's way more on Amanda Waller. Why are you not monitoring this guy? He's literally a convicted felon. He is known to do some pretty bad and selfish things, and when Amanda Waller does end up looking into him, it is discovered that he was behind the firing of the Watchtower's fusion cannon, and not only that, he was trying to transfer his consciousness into an Amazo armor. So yeah, not a great decision, Amanda Waller. That'll be another video because that's another knock against her versus Cadmus itself. Another thing that is more so Amanda Waller, but Cadmus had a hand in, is using the Ultimate clones and the clone of Supergirl to attack the Watchtower. Not only attack it, but their mission was literally to blow up the Watchtower, killing virtually everyone on there, not just the heroes. We are led to believe and are shown that there are more people than just the heroes on the Watchtower. There are literally ordinary people who just work there and help maintain the logistics of running the Watchtower. So the fact that Cadmus, or more specifically Amanda Waller, were just totally okay with all these people dying after they themselves decided the Justice League was solely responsible is pretty outrageous, considering the whole conception of Cadmus was to stop a group of people from being judge, jury, and executioner, which is literally what Amanda Waller decided to do in this moment. But again, that's why I say, I'm not saying that Amanda Waller is justified at all. She's a horrible person, especially in this universe, especially until later, but even then is still horrible because she has Bruce Wayne cloned and tries to kill Terry's parents. So again, not a great person, but that'll be another video. To me, this does not negate the justification for Cadmus, because if you had someone else in charge, or if you maybe had a committee, they would have at least investigated the Justice League before determining that all of these heroes were just guilty right off the bat. They all need to die, plus all the innocent people aboard the Watchtower. So I can't fully put this against Cadmus. This is more so something that Amanda Waller herself did decide. And then last but not least, Tala and the whole Tala situation with her taking the Annihilator armor and getting manipulated by Felix Faust. I put this last on the list for a couple reasons, mainly because there were no ramifications to this for the people of Earth. And that's mainly because Felix Faust took this armor and decided to go straight to Hades, because that's the person he blamed most, so he just wanted to kill Hades. Now, if he had succeeded, would he have set his sights on the people of Earth and maybe ruling in some way, shape, or form? Possibly, but it's not something that we, the audience, or the public were made aware of or were ever forced to see happen. So that is why I do have it last on this list. That being said, those are all of the big negatives that did happen as a result of Cadmus, while also factoring all of the justifications and all of the reasonings for Cadmus. And that is why, in my opinion, I truly do believe that in the DCAU, Cadmus being a thing is definitely justified. And another episode that showed this was the episode Clash in Justice League Unlimited. And that shows us Shazam fighting against Superman in Lexor City. And we saw a devastating amount of destruction. There were buildings collapsing, buses being destroyed, cars being blown up, all from the result of two superpowered people fighting in that area. And again, neither of these people were being brainwashed by this point. Was Superman being manipulated in some way? Yes, because Lex Luthor does admit that this was all just to get under Superman's skin. However, even he underestimated how angry Superman would be and the destruction that would be caused by him and Shazam fighting each other in front of all these people. So once again, the public is shown what could happen if the powers of Superman are used in a way that aren't just to save people. Because although in that moment he was trying to defuse a bomb that he believed was just laced with kryptonite and would do a ton of damage, he did no investigating. He decided on his own, told everyone to leave, and then just started demolishing down through the city to get to the bomb. I feel like optically it could have been handled better by Superman, especially when you consider all the events that have led up to this, and when you consider the public perception that people have had for the Justice League. And in my opinion, one of the lines that really highlights the Justice League becoming like the Justice Lords is something Martian Manhunter said when Big Barda and Mr. Miracle did go to the League for help. They needed to save Oberon from the forces of Apocalypse, and Jean literally said, "That's not our problem. We're not interested in helping one faction of Apocalypse come into power because Darkseid was a huge threat. It's better they fight amongst themselves, let them handle their own problems." And now, while looking at this at its surface is not inherently bad, because yes, the forces of Apocalypse are not going to be allies. They are really bad people. This has been shown time and time again. The person they were talking about saving wasn't someone from Apocalypse. He was someone from Earth. He was someone who was kidnapped and taken to Apocalypse. And for Jean to then have that point made to him and still double down and say, "We don't have the resources to go help you. Even though we have all these new heroes, we can't waste any forces going to save one person. We have to weigh it out. Would we save one person or billions?" And in this moment, I love Flash's response because he is absolutely appalled by it, because they are supposed to save anyone and everyone that they possibly can. It is not a numbers game. It is not, hey, this mission is going to save 1,000 people. This mission is only going to save 5 people. Let's go with this one. No, we have two different situations and two different sets of people that are in danger. So you know what we're going to do? We have 3 heroes to spare. We're going to send you 2 heroes over here because you're best well equipped to handle that situation. And then you're going to go over here and try to save those people. That is what true heroes do. You are up against it. The odds are not in your favor. That is what makes you heroes. Against all odds, you are going to fight for what's right and fight for those who can't fight for themselves. And the Justice League definitely lost the way and lost that mentality along the way. In my opinion, the only characters that throughout the whole series still embodied that were Green Arrow, Flash, and you could argue Batman. But even he himself started to doubt his viewpoints on things. And that is why he brought Green Arrow in, as I mentioned earlier. So to me, I think all of this shows why Cadmus truly was justified in the DCAU. But let me know what all of you think. Do you agree with my takes on this? Do you agree that all of this unchecked power could be a huge problem? Aside from what Amanda Waller did and how she decided to run Cadmus, do you believe that Cadmus as an entity was justified in its creation? And do you also agree that the DCAU is the best best superhero universe we've ever gotten on screen. Not only that, do you also think that the Cadmus arc was by far the best arc in the DCAU? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And I'll see all of you in the next video. Goodbye.